as actuaries, we need to recognize our own limitations. We are a 4-degree world would be uninsurable, where 4 degrees is the average temperature rise over pre-industrial.
Hello everyone, welcome to this episode of Not So Nerdy Actuary. Today I have with me a very special guest, the current president of IFoA, Miss Louise Pryor. Hi, welcome to the show. Can you just tell our audience a bit about your journey to becoming an IFoA president?
It's a long journey. I'm not as young as I was when I started out. I've had a very varied career. Okay, so I did start off as an actuary and I qualified quite quickly, which was good. And along that way, I did pensions, life insurance, general insurance. But then I decided I wanted to go and do something else. So I went and I did a PhD in artificial intelligence over in the States. I'm from the UK originally, so I lived in the States for some years. And then I came back and was a university lecturer and then in the software industry and so on. And eventually I got fed up of all that. So I came back. I sort of eased myself back into the actuarial world, if you like, by I did freelance consulting, trying to help actuaries with their software. So this was, when was it? Around the turn of the millennium, a lot of actuaries using spreadsheets, but also, of course, the big modeling packages. I was telling them, well, look, you really need to take software development seriously. You need to think about software engineering techniques, even possibly, especially with spreadsheets. So I did that for a bit and then went to the Financial Reporting Council in the UK, which at that stage was taking over responsibility for the technical actuarial standards. So I led the development of the technical actuarial standards there. And since then, I've been, for the last 10 years or so, 9 or 10 years, again, I've been a freelance actuary again. Now, all along the way, from pretty much from when I came back to the UK, I was trying to get involved by doing volunteer work with the actuaries, with the IFoA. Well, it wasn't the IFoA then, but anyway, with the Institute of Actuaries, because I really enjoyed it. It was a good way of meeting people, actually, and thinking about interesting things. And since the last 9 or 10 years, I've been heavily involved in the sustainability area in the IFoA. So I was chair of, as it was then called, the Resource and Environment Board, and I went on to council. And so then eventually I've ended up as president. So that's it. So it's been a very unconventional career. I wouldn't recommend it as a template for other people necessarily.
Well, I completely get that. And just to add a bit to that, how has your life changed a bit after becoming an IFoA president? If you would like to tell our viewers a bit about that.
It hasn't changed. So I became president at the end of June, so just about a month ago. So it hasn't changed a lot then, because actually what happens is, as president, you get 3 years. You get a year as the president-elect, then you get a year as the president, and then a year as the immediate past president. So it's a team thing. So all last year, I was heavily involved. A lot of meetings, a lot of meetings, various committees and things, but also one-to-ones with a lot of people. And of course, all last year, it's been totally online. I expected that what you expect as president is that you also spend a lot of time going to events. Is one of the sort of elements of the role description is as an ambassador for the profession. So you go, you attend dinners in the insurance industry, in the pensions industry in the UK, that sort of thing. You go to the international meetings at the IAA, the AAE, all that sort of course. None of those have happened. So yeah, so I've been sitting at home in my office here meeting people, which is good. I mean, it's a lot better. And I'm sure in many ways I've met a lot more people by not having to be in the same physical location as them.
Yeah, that's actually been a great benefit of things getting virtual. And thank you so much for taking a bit of time out of so busy schedule to have a one-on-one with us and put across your message to the viewers. And I don't think there's someone more qualified at such a position to whom I can ask this question. And this question I generally ask to a lot of actuaries, specifically the experienced ones, that how important do you think is the knowledge of programming and data science concept in the actuarial profession? Since you've been on that side of the world too.
Yeah, and I spent a lot of my life programming. I loved it. I do still do some programming, and I love it. I love the intellectual exercise of trying to sort problems out. I love the feeling of building stuff. I mean, that's essentially what you're doing as a programmer. You're building stuff. I mean, so it's very creative in that way, and I love that. I don't think to be a successful actuary, certainly as you get more senior, I don't think you have to understand the details of programming. I mean, I really wouldn't say that, successful actuaries need to be experts in Python or R or anything else. What they need to understand is some of the concepts, and especially what we're talking about here, certainly in data analytics, is building models. So the real thing that we have to understand, both the people building the models and also the people using the models, is what are the models good for and what are their limitations? And because they're different types of models, so they have different types of limitations maybe, but the basic concept is what's the point of the model? What's it going to help you do? And is the purpose you're using it for, is that, are you going to fall foul, if you like, of any of its limitations? And that's the really important thing.
Well, sure. And since you know about artificial intelligence a lot, just something which I came up to my mind is that, do you think there is some ethical dilemma when it comes to using artificial intelligence at a certain point? Or for example, when you're making pricing model and then suddenly a machine suggests you certain variables which might not be ethically correct. So do you think there is a kind of problem of ethics in artificial intelligence?
I think there's a problem of ethics with all the work we do. We have to think about and where the line is drawn, I think, depends very much on the individual person. But a lot of it is there bias here? And if there's bias, and usually because of the data, if you're working on limited data, there's going to be bias because all you've got is the data you've got. You haven't got the other data, as it were. You need to be aware of that because that's a limitation of the model. And then you need to think, is this a problem? Do I personally care about it? Can I live with this? And that's an individual judgment, and different people come down in different places on that. But you also need to think, is this then posing a risk to either me or the organization? And typically that's going to be a reputational risk or a regulatory risk. And I think it's one of the things that we can do is actuaries, because we are very risk focused. I mean, what are we if we're not risk professionals, is to think about the possible risks and to think about them in the bigger picture as well. What are people going to say? Would I be able to justify this to my older relatives, for example, my grandmother, my grandfather? What would they think about if I said this is what we were doing? And if they would have doubts about it ethically, then other people probably are going to too. Or think of not necessarily older relatives, but think about the most, upstanding and respectable person if you would have problems justifying it to them, then there is a risk there, and you need to think about it. And it might not be a problem, but you need to think about it, and you probably need to alert your client or employer or boss or whatever that there is a potential risk here. You might not be able to do anything about it if you're a fairly junior person, but it's always your duty, I think, to alert people to potential risks.
That's a very good parameter which you have suggested out there, and I guess it makes a lot of sense when you think of it from that perspective. And since I've been working on sustainability since like almost a decade, there's a large set of population which thinks that talking about impacts of climate change is too soon, and it's more of like pie in the sky with not enough weight in the arguments. What would you like to convey to all the people who have this kind of mindset?
Well, I'd like to point them at the current weather reports from around the world, the floods, the bushfires, and things. You know, these are not happening. Well, they are, I suppose, by accident, but I mean, we are seeing the absolute results of climate change in the changing weather patterns. We are getting extreme weather events much more frequently than we used to in various areas. What we're seeing is there's been a lot of work done recently on validating all the models that have been used. I mean, because we've been using climate change models for 30, 40 years in some cases. And it turns out that all the work that's being done shows that the models are really pretty good at projecting average temperature changes. So, you know, the 0.6, the 1, the 2 degree temperature change, we're absolutely spot on that. What we're not necessarily so good at is predicting what that means for the actual weather that particular places get. And I think we are, you know, and it's absolutely, climate change is not a risk. Climate change itself is a certainty. It is happening. You know, the scientific consensus is just, I think it's something like 97, 98%. I mean, you know, you've got a really, really strong consensus that climate change is happening. So it's not a risk. We know it's happening. Where the risk comes in is from the impacts. And also, I get often people say to me, well, why are you so gloomy? Aren't you a bit of a, you know, doom prophet? You know, surely can't you be a bit more cheerful about this? It's not a question of being cheerful or optimistic or anything. Again, as risk professionals, what do? Do we talk only about what we think is most likely to happen? Or do we talk about what the more extremes could be? As risk professionals, we talk about the extremes. So we can't just ignore the worst that can happen. That would be irresponsible of us. We may not think that that worst is going to happen. You know, who knows? But the point is, if it could happen, then we need, as risk professionals, to be thinking about it.
That makes a lot of sense. And I guess, so do you think it's safe to say that when we look at impacts of climate change, it's generally a statement that climate change impacts are a long-term risk? Do you think it's safe to say that it's no more a long-term risk and it has somehow become something of a short-term to a medium-term risk, the risk when it comes to impact, specifically seeing the fires in Canada, temperatures reaching 49.5 and more in Canada, which was unimaginable. So do you think it's kind of become a more of, the impacts have become a more of short-term to a medium-term risk?
And long-term, but it's at all time durations. What we're seeing now is, you know, 30 years ago, people were saying it was a long-term risk. That was 30 years ago. This is now 30 years to many people counts as a long-term risk. So yeah, of course it's happening now. We can't say that it's only going to happen in the long term. We are seeing the short-term effects now. People say, well, it matters for our children, for our grandchildren. Yes, it really does. It's going to be a lot worse for them if we don't do anything, but it also matters for us. And it matters for both you, looking at you. My guess is that you're just a few years younger than me. But, you know, I'm near the end of my career. And I suppose in that sense, near the end of my life. That's not the way I usually think about it. But, you know, I've got, I hope, a good few years left in me. And it matters for my future as well. And it certainly matters for your future. And it matters for the future generations. So it's yes, it is a long-term risk, but yes, it is a short-term. It's a current risk as well.
Exactly, that's what I wanted to listen and convey to the viewers as well. And I was reading a report from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which is a government agency in the US. And they say in a report that Miami streets could flood every single day by 2070, going by the current rate. So do you think in the future this would make insurance and consequently reinsurance very unaffordable for some and very, very expensive going forward?
Absolutely. One of the big problems is that a CEO of AXA said some years ago now, 5 or 6 years ago, I can't remember the exact date, he said that a 4-degree world would be uninsurable, where 4 degrees is the average temperature rise over pre-industrial. If we don't do anything, if we carry on just the way we are, a 4-degree world is very possible. It's not necessarily the central prediction, but it's not far off. So yes, I mean, I think that the insurance industry has huge questions to answer, huge challenges to think about. How is it? Well, I mean, there's several things. Is the insurance industry financing and supporting activities that are going to mean that there is no future insurance activity? And if that's right, is that a good thing to do? Are they, and this is both through the investment side and through the underwriting side. I mean, if you're underwriting thermal coal extraction, why? You know, just short-term profit, yes, but what about the long-term future of your industry, but also of civilization, if you like, of the human race? There's the bigger picture too. And is the industry taking advantage of all the amazing opportunities there are? So the risk landscape is changing. So our customers, policyholders, individual people up to the large corporations, they are having to navigate this changing risk landscape. Is the insurance industry providing the products and services that will help the users do that? And is it providing products and services that will assist society as a whole, both global society down to local societies, I mean, it's all the same thing, to mitigate climate-related and other sustainability risks too. I mean, let's not forget biodiversity risk here too, but also adaptation risk. So we are seeing the climate change, so we have to adapt to that. Are the products and services the insurance industry is providing, are they helping people to do that, or are they preventing people from doing that? And those are some big questions which the industry should be thinking about.
Those are very serious questions to be answered by the industry. And since as an actuaries, we love benchmarks and reference points. So I was looking at this Actuaries Climate Index from CAS, SOA, and American Academy of Actuaries, which gives you kind of a reference point for that. But the thing is that that's specific to US and Canada as well. So do you think there is something which probably IFoA might work or can work to produce some kind of an index for the UK region, or is it there, which is something already existing and I don't know about? So
no, it doesn't exist yet. The IFoA has done some work on this. I think we're now working together with the AAE, which is the Actuarial Association of Europe, to think about producing a Europe-wide one. I know the Australians have done very good work. I believe the Australians have got an Australian index now. So there is a lot going on in this space.
Okay, that kind of answers it. And another thing is, we as an actuaries generally, when we say that past is what reflects the future, but obviously when you look at it from a climate change perspective, the past data is kind of not that reflective of the future, and there has to be a lot of calibrations which would have to be done to the data from that standpoint. So how do you think going forward, will the past data become kind of redundant, or do you think a lot of calibrations have to be done towards it, and how much data has to be changed to reflect the actual future according to your experience in the last decade?
It's a huge challenge we have as a profession, and actually it's a huge opportunity too, because people, actuaries have worked mainly in insurance and pensions and in investments a bit, but people in all sorts of industries, other financial services industries, but all sorts of other industries too, are realizing that we have to do something about climate related risks. We have to manage them. And the thing is that these risks are very different from the risks that people are used to dealing with. Most people are used to dealing with fairly small scale, very repeatable risks. So even in insurance, things like motor insurance, for example, you've got oodles of data because these things happen over and over again. Even nat cats, which are much rarer, we've still got oodles of data. But these sustainability risks are different in that they are not repeatable. They're not one-off exactly, but they're chronic and long-lasting. They also have such significant effects that they change the fundamentals. So it's not like the risk sort of just comes in, goes, whoops, this is happening, and then goes away again and everything goes back to normal. It sort of changes the fundamentals of how the economy and society is going to operate. You've got the whole tipping point thing that you can't, once an ice cap has melted, you can't refreeze it. Once a species has gone extinct, you can't reintroduce it. So these risks are very, very different. So we've got to develop our existing tools and probably invent new ones to be able to think more productively about these risks. And we're starting to do that, a lot of work being done on scenario analysis and narratives and that sort of thing. But everybody's in the same boat, except that actuaries are a step ahead because we have been thinking about risks, and especially long-term risks, for many, many years. So this should be a fantastic opportunity for us as a profession, in that we just have a bit of a head start, as it were, on this really, really difficult problem. And really difficult problems are also opportunities, because isn't it fun and interesting and challenging to think about them?
Well, it's completely right. And as all of the reports suggest, that going forward in the next decade, cyber risk and climate change risk would be the two most important challenges. And these are the two most interesting problems as an actuaries which we do have to face. Now, if you look at the laws and policies around the world, until I guess 1997, there were around 60 laws and policies. And the latest data by 2017, there are around 1,200 global policies just related to climate change. And on the other hand, what it has led to is that the lawsuits are increasing. So since 2015, there have been 21 lawsuits just directly related to climate change. So do you think such kind of a regulatory atmosphere and kind of lawsuits increasing, it kind of put the insurance industry at a back foot and at the front foot at the same time? And it makes them in certain sort of a dilemma that how do you go about and start writing certain risks, because certainly due to climate change, there have been increasing lawsuits, specifically in the US region, a lot in the last 5 to 6 years regarding emissions and controls by the industry. So how do you think this impacts the insurance industry?
I think there's two things. One is there's a big worry, is there a huge hidden liability there, as we had you're too young to remember this, but when the whole asbestos thing grew, blew up 30, 40 years ago, that people didn't know that. People kind of knew that asbestos wasn't very nice, but they didn't know about the huge asbestosis liability that emerged. And is there going to be a similar sort of hidden liability that's going to emerge? And the other thing is that insurers can be thinking now about their T's and C's and just making sure they don't write business, they don't provide covers that are going to have them on the hook for this. And of course, that's where, if, say, the directors, if a major oil company can't get D&O cover that covers climate-related risk, that's a big deal.
Yes, certainly, that's what my question that directly to you was. And moving forward, how do you think actuaries can contribute towards managing climate risks, since we are considered to be the best when it comes at managing risks and identifying them? So
yeah, so I've talked about this a bit in earlier about how we need to develop new techniques to handle these different types of risks. And I think that one of the most valuable things we can do is to bring the whole risk management attitude to this, the whole attitude of not planning not planning only for the most likely outcome, but thinking about the spread of outcomes. Basically taking a mature and responsible risk management attitude, I think, can be a huge contribution here.
well, that certainly is. And do you think this also provides a new opportunity in this area for the actuaries and specifically the insurance industries to tap into this market and make sure you contribute towards the society as well as you contribute towards the climate at the same time, and also keeping profits in the mind? So
yes, that's the short answer. Yes. I mean, one thing we have got to do is that we've got to, as actuaries, we need to recognize our own limitations. We are not climate scientists. What does that mean? It means we have to learn to work with climate scientists. And I think one area where we can do really good work is thinking about the economic and financial implications of climate risk, because that's kind of what a lot of non-life insurance does anyway. It looks at the sort of monetary hit. Of course, there are many other impacts too, and we mustn't forget the human impacts. I mean, money isn't everything, and there's going to be, we're seeing huge problems because of droughts, because of disease. I mean, well, here we are. So if we look at disease, we start seeing that you can't isolate things. So you can't say that COVID-19 is because of climate change, but you can't say that it wasn't influenced by climate change, because zoonotic diseases typically arise when habitats are under pressure, when people come into closer contact with wildlife because of habitat pressure. And of course, one of the big causes of habitat pressure and loss of biodiversity is climate change. So it's all connected. It really is.
Yes, and then to those who are just skipping this video and just moving forward to all of this, just to summarize in 2-3 words, what we generally talked about here is that there are certain risks which you can basically put down into buckets of physical risks, some transition risks, and some liability risks. And probably if you find these terms interesting, you would want to not skip it and go back and watch this whole video together. So moving forward to the last question of today, in the end, would you like to give any advice to the younger actuaries who are viewing it, since they spend most of their time studying, doing jobs, studying, and then on a repeat mode? So what advice would you like to give to the younger actuaries watching this?
Be open to new ideas. Keep learning. If you watched my presidential address, you'll know that was a major theme in keep learning things. The world isn't going to stand still, so you need to keep up with the world, and don't think that just because whatever it is what actuaries have always done, that it's the right thing to do now, and don't think that you're limited to what actuaries have always done, because the world is new, the world is changing, and we should be alive to the opportunities.
That's certainly a golden advice, and I'm sure that people would benefit out of this. Thank you so much for giving us this time. And if you want to watch such more content, do like, share, and subscribe. Thank you, ma'am, and I wish you all the best for your future. Thank you so much for giving your time.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.